Missing Link is the story of a lonely Sasquatch. He lives here, somewhere in the great Pacific Northwest during the Victorian era. He is alone, he's lonely, and he contacts Sir Lionel Frost, who's an aristocratic gentleman who lives in Victorian England, because he actually believes in his existence, and he convinces him to take him on a journey to the fabled valley of Shangri-La in the Himalayas, where he feels like he will be reconnected with his brethren. And along the way they meet Adelina Fortnight, who has a history with Sir Lionel, and she also has a map and will help take him to discover Shangri-La. They kind of go on this journey together, and it's a comedic action. It's a comedy action adventure that spans the globe, and you follow this trio of wonderful characters, and it's really fun, and it's beautiful. We set out to make something intentionally that was a departure from our last film and other stop-motion films, and the idea of it being bold and beautiful with really intense colors and kind of a lighter feel, and trying to intentionally step away from what we think maybe audiences might expect from stop-motion animation. So it was really intentional, and it was fun. I think there's so much comedy in it. It's like character-driven comedy. We have some slapstick in it, and just the lighter, brighter feeling of it also helps the audience know, it's not bittersweet. It ends. It's more on the side of sweet. I think we explore some real feelings about what it means to be human, what it means to belong, about exploring loneliness a little bit. But because it is bright and bold, it just feels lighter, I think, in nature. And I think the performances are really light and bright. Sir Lionel Frost is played by Hugh Jackman, and he brings a certain joy and panache to the role. I think he gets a kick out of when he's being, at his most egocentric, and it's fun for me as an audience member to watch that. And his interactions with, the Mr. Link character played by Zach Galifianakis is so, it's unexpected. I don't think it's something that audiences have heard before. It doesn't feel like another character. And he is just, like I said, he is innocent, and he's childlike, and he expresses so much joy. You are joyful watching him, and he's physically, you just want to hug him. At least I do. And he's just, I think as characters, you want to spend a lot of screen time with them. Zoe Saldana's, her character is fun. She's an adventurous in her own right. She's got a great voice, and it's fun and unexpected, the decisions that she makes along the way. I have had the great pleasure of working with Chris on, for over 10 years, and there's anything I know about him, he is all about Raiders of the Lost Ark, and he absolutely adores Sherlock Holmes. He enjoys also just like the Victorian time period, and I think Sir Lionel Frost is an incredible combination of both of those characters. Chris Butler is incredible. He has written the script, so he knows the characters inside and out. He knows how they're supposed to sound, what he thinks they're supposed to look like, what they're wearing, how they move. He has a backstory for them, so he knows where they come from and what their secrets are. He knows what their arc is going to be. he has, you know, over the last 10 years grown as a filmmaker here at LAIKA, and so he knows the ins and outs of stop motions and how you want to push the medium. What's great about it, he's comes from a 2D animator background, and he really brings a lot of that into his filmmaking. The theme about wanting to belong and missing link, I mean, that is the universal theme, I think, for anyone who's human, right? That's what, to me, that's what it means to be human. You want to belong. You want to be loved by your family, by your tribe. You want to fit in. You want to find your place. And I think it's a universal theme. I don't think there's anybody, you know, who doesn't feel that way. What I love about Missing Link is that it takes a very positive approach. By the end of that movie, my hope and feeling, and what we've been trying to do, is that when anybody, they watch that movie and leave the theater, people feel like I will find my place in the world, that is absolutely possible for everybody here. In the third act, they're in Shangri-La, they're in the valley, they're on an ice bridge, and they're having a battle. And we're working with all these different scales of puppets, and it's stop motion animation, and everything's practical. So they're like either this big or this big. And it really is suspenseful. And I think I'm very proud of how that was pulled off. There's suspense in it and comedy, and every time I see it, I am concerned. Are they or aren't they? Are they going to, you know, fall to their deaths, or are they going to climb up? And that was grueling to make and put together, but I think really successful. Every time you make one set, that's a unique set, a unique environment. Once you start to push in and figure out how to shoot these things, they multiply, because you have to tear them apart, and maybe you pull things against green screens, or you push in. And so in the end, while we had 65 sets, we had over 95 shooting units. And that is a large, that's just an explosion of work. That's a lot of moving parts to keep track of. And the 65-ness of it all is that what's remarkable about 65 sets is that on this one, we don't ever come back and use that set again. So you might have a set of, for example, the Indian jungle, where it's this incredible, lush, tropical, greens heavy set, where you have a gigantic stop motion elephant where 4 bodies have to be on the top of it, and it's really only for this one sequence and just like a handful of shots, and never to be returned again. But you put all of this attention and time and effort into it to make it spectacular, and multiply that by maybe 65 times, and then you've got a challenging, epic action-adventure movie in stop motion. First of all, the music is just absolutely lovely, and I recommend you buy the soundtrack and listen to the soundtrack. And it also, of course, supports, I think, the action-adventure of it all. But my favorite really is his kind of emotional music. And he is just natural with it. And it's really, really lovely. We wanted a song, an ends song, an original ends song that would leave audiences on a grace note, and that could express the optimism that I think our 2 characters, you know, bring to the audience. The optimism that they feel in continuing their adventures, in finding their partnership and friendship. And we also wanted a song that was kind of out of time, that didn't say necessarily it was a contemporary song, but didn't want to feel too old-timey either. And I think Walter Martin wrote this song. It's kind of in a nod to, as if it was in the voice of Mr. Link, but it really expresses just the optimism of their friendship just through his vocals and the song itself, and it will stick with you forever. We really love this song. I want them first and foremost to enjoy a really fun, rollicking adventure with wonderful characters that they want to spend a couple of hours with. It's a feast for the eyes. It's a feast for the ears. You want to spend time with these characters. I love its messages. I love how fun it is, and I love how it explores friendship. And I think I want people to leave feeling optimistic about, and kids, about, their place in the world and the nature of the world, and what there's so much to explore. The world is a wonderful place to explore, and then you will find your place in it. It may not be your family of origin. It may not be what you think it is at the beginning. The place, where you want to belong may not be the same place that you end up belonging. You're finding out is your right place, but it is there for you, and it's there for everyone.
What I'm most proud of at being part of LAIKA is that we're telling stories that are a little bit different. What excites me about film is that you have the opportunity to tell any kind of story, particularly in animation, where there are no boundaries. And I think what we do here is that we tell our own stories. We have a unique perspective. We make movies that maybe other people wouldn't make. And I find that very exciting, because there really is no limit to the kind of stories that we can tell here. Essentially, we're kind of like making live action movies in miniature. So we have sets, we have cameras and lights, we have all the things that go into a huge Hollywood movie, but we have them in miniature. And I think walking around LAIKA is a magical experience. You feel like you're walking around Santa's grotto, Santa's workshop. There's so many industrious people, talented artists who are working behind the scenes, making props, sets, puppets, costumes. It's such an eclectic bunch of talented people that you don't often get to see doing these things. I love animation in all its forms, every type of animation. And I think there is a place for it all. There is a place for the kind of crazy Tex Avery, Warner Brothers inspired stuff, and there's a place for the musicals, and there's a place for the fairy tales, and there's a place for everything. I love it all. I would happily drink it all in. I think what's great is that we have our own voice. We're not necessarily chasing the last big success in animation. We are telling stories that are unique. And sometimes they're challenging stories, but I think that was always what excited me most about animation when I was younger. It was the stories that maybe pushed the boundaries a little, or challenged you to think. And that's always been a rich tradition of folklore and fairy tale. You're telling stories to kids, to families, and you're asking them to think a little bit about where they fit into the world. I don't think there's been any place that I've worked at quite this long before. I've been at LAIKA for 13 years, so you get to know these people who work here really well. You almost get a shorthand in working with them, and you get to know them as people. And I think, we've been in the trenches together on many movies now, and it's a play. They're comrades, comrades in arms. They're colleagues and friends, and I think there is something special that comes out of that kind of relationship, that kind of dynamic. When we first started on Coraline, this kind of movie wasn't being made that much. I mean, it's still not compared to like CG movies, although it has had something of a resurgence. But I think when they were crewing up for Coraline, they were really reaching out all over the world for people who were the best at the various jobs that go into making a stop motion movie, and bringing that talent pool together. That I think that was instrumental to the quality of the movies that we ended up making, because you bring all these innovators together and they're going to continue to innovate, and bounce ideas off each other. Missing Link is about Bigfoot, America's legendary beast, and he is lonely and he wants to track down his long-lost relatives, the Yetis, who live in the Himalayas, of course. So he enlists the help of a world-renowned but not entirely successful explorer called Sir Lionel Frost. And Sir Lionel is quite keen on making a name for himself, so he eagerly accepts the challenge, and they go on a quest to locate the mythical Shangri-La. The stuff that I really like is when you have characters communicating, and the comedy that comes out of a dynamic relationship. And I think what I was aiming for with Link and Sir Lionel was kind of like an odd couple, that kind of planes, trains, and automobiles dynamic. And I often think of Link as kind of like John Candy as an ape, but it was also that double act. It was the Sherlock Holmes and his very hairy Watson. And I think finding just the humor that comes out of character rather than gags is the stuff that I really like, because it makes you chuckle, but it also makes you identify with the characters. It makes you like them a little bit more. We spend a lot of time thinking about casting and what goes into a voice and what goes into a character. And there was a certain otherworldliness, I think, to Zach, and a vulnerability as well that comes across in his comedy, and insecurity. And that seemed perfect for this creature that had no experience of civilization. He'd never been out in the big, broad world. He'd read about it, but that's not the same as experiencing it. And I think what he brought to it wasn't just the comedy, it was that sense of vulnerability. You do warm to him because you want to comfort him. You want to reach in and give him a big hug, because he's a nice guy and he's struggling so hard. In the movie, I wanted a strong female character, but that had her own part to play in this dynamic. And part of it was that I wanted someone to be part of this quest, to be part of this journey, who was opposed to Sir Lionel, but not in the same way that Link was, and creating a history to Sir Lionel. Like, she knows him, she dated him. And I thought that was an interesting facet to it, because she clearly likes him. And I think it's because they share a passion. They share a passion for adventure. It's set in Victorian times, and Sir Lionel spends most of the movie bemoaning how people don't accept him. And he's like a rich white guy, and she's an immigrant, and she's a widow. And at one point he even says to her, you can't possibly understand what I'm going through. And I liked that she had her own reasons for feeling like an outsider, like Link and Lionel do. There's that rich tapestry of stories that exist that are about adventuring in this bright new historical world. And I wanted to play with that. I wanted I wanted to, Sherlock Holmes meets Indiana Jones chasing monsters. I mean, who doesn't want that? And part of the reason I set it at the turn of the 19th century was because the world was just starting to open up. It was an exciting time. All these new exotic places were becoming more accessible and certainly becoming more apparent in popular culture. I'm always interested in pushing the boundaries of the medium, pushing the boundaries of stop motion animation. And I think one thing that is traditionally part of stop motion is it's the scope of it is quite small. And that, you know, historically there is a reason for that. You have sets, and physical puppets. So the kinds of stories that were being told in stop motion always felt a little bit more maybe claustrophobic. That world has since opened out, and certainly the kind of hybridization of the medium that we do here using a lot of digital effects, it really meant that we could take what's special about stop motion, which is, you know, real light on real objects, but open up the canvas, knock down the walls. On each movie that we make, we are constantly trying new things, but I think what was special about this particular movie is that we were taking innovations that we've already played with in other movies, and we were just pushing them to their limits. And that was a lot to do with the amount of like digital set extensions, CG characters. And I've watched this movie hundreds of times now, and there are shots where I can't tell where there's a puppet and where there's a CG character. So I think we are managing to really make the best possible use of the technology. I think the facial animation on this movie is incredibly successful. We really pushed it as far as we could, and I think we've come up with nuanced and complex character performances in the facial animation like nothing we've seen before. I was very much influenced by Errol LaCaine, who was an artist who did very detailed, pattern-rich illustrations. He was also the production designer on The Thief and the Cobbler, the 2D movie that was never completed, Richard Williams. So there was that. There was National Geographic. There was all these influences that came together. 101 Dalmatians, the Disney movie, which had a really bold, graphic look that I thought lent itself well to the Victorian setting here. She knows what goes on in here as well as anybody, so I think she understands the kind of movie that I'm trying to make, the kind of story I'm trying to tell. She gets my sensibilities, which is a huge plus for a producer. She shares the sensibilities. She's got a great eye. She's got great taste. And it's the same with Travis. You know, I think the three of us have impeccable taste. So I think that's why we get along. There are those movies that you watch when you're a kid that just stay with you. And for me, it was Raiders of the Lost Ark, and it was the Star Wars movies, and it was certain animated movies. But they were those movies who, when I left the theater, I knew I wanted to make films. And I think that's what I want. I want to take kids to this exciting, huge, colorful world that will thrill them and make them laugh and make them fall in love with the characters and walk out the cinema and all want to work in animation. I have watched this thing so many times over the past 5 years, from the storyboard animatics right through to the finished, graded, beautiful final product, and I am still not tired of it. I think it's a beautiful, entertaining, exciting roller coaster of a movie.
I was so thrilled because I love their movies. I've always loved their movies, but my son in particular, my daughter also loves it, but my son in particular is a massive fan. He loves stop motion animation, and he was the one actually to tell me more about LAIKA than I knew, which is how they do things in the traditional way, still doing the stop motion, each frame with the real puppets, and on the sets. And that's when I started looking at the CDs, and I just about the company and about how they make their movies, and he was right. I mean, what they do is absolutely unbelievable. I mean, they're still winning Oscars for innovative sort of technology, with their 3D printing and other things, but in essence, it's the purity and creativity and the humor of those great stop motion animation artists, and I just love being part of that. And more importantly, I'm now cool with my son. That's all that matters. When he's 15, that's not an easy thing to achieve. Creative, funny, innovative, joyful. What's one word for rhythm? Well, I suppose rhythm, but unique, original. And for this movie, epic, comedic adventure. I love working with Chris. He's he's incredibly collaborative. He's amazingly generous and open to other ideas, particularly for a writer. I always think it must be hard for a director, but for a writer-director who must hear the movie in their head, to allow an actor to interpret it and do their own thing is a very generous thing, and that is Chris. He's patient, and he's also got just a unique look on storytelling. I think he has a rhythm, he has a style that is all his own, and that I think is increasingly difficult nowadays in the film business, and patient is a great word for him. Doing these movies is a long process. It's much longer for him, of course, than it is for me. I get the joy of coming in every few weeks or whatever just to sort of play with these characters, but for him it's this marathon, and every time I see him, he doesn't seem weighed down by the process. He just seems to really love it and to revel in it, and that's priceless. I loved Sir Lionel and all his intricacies, and he's an eccentric, he's selfish, he's adventurous, he's courageous, and that all leapt off the page. But actually, once I got into working with Chris, I love the way he allows and encourages me to do the surprising choice, or to play the opposite of what you think the scene might originally be, and just to play with it, to really flesh out these characters. Working on an animated movie with Chris is as layered and as deep as working on any kind of movie that you would do or play or anything. Chris really encouraged me, I think, to see the character for his strengths, but also his flaws. He's someone, as he said, goes on a real journey through the movie. So he starts the movie in a way quite selfish and in need of status and recognition for who he is. He's an outsider and he wants to be on the inside. And it's sort of by accident, really, that he starts to stumble upon the better side of his nature. He thinks he's fine, but obviously his selfishness is getting in the way of that. And Chris really sort of encouraged me to make that character arc clear, to really allow him to grow through the movie. As much as he's funny and we like him from the beginning, in some ways, he never wanted me to play it in a two-dimensional way. So my character, Sir Lionel Frost, is an adventurer of trying to find mythical creatures. So this is in the early 1900s, the Loch Ness Monster, Sasquatch, these famed, the Fiji mermaid. There was believed to be all these mythical creatures, and these adventurers are the ones to go out and find them. And if you're successful enough, then you can be entered into the Great Adventurers Club of England, which is a very highbrow, very important club. And so Lionel really wants to be accepted by these people. And in order to do so, he believes he needs to make a great discovery. So his whole life is really about trying to get into this club, make a name for himself, and be accepted by society. So he goes off, he gets a letter, and he goes off to find Sasquatch, the missing link. It's really a story about finding your tribe, being yourself, and also about true friendship being more important than the things we chase, like acceptance. He was such great fun to play. I think he's courageous and adventurous, but he's also a little silly, And it was great fun to play because he's so wrapped up in himself and in his quest and having to conquer what he wants in his own ambition. But during the movie, I think he slowly begins to open up through the relationship with Adelina, played by Zoe Saldana, and the relationship with Mr. Link. He actually creates a real friendship and an understanding of who he is. But the whole character I found tremendous fun. When they meet, Lionel assumes this is a big mythical monster and he might have to wrestle him or, somehow sort of bring him down. But he actually is a very soft and gentle, mysterious creature who is lonely and kind and wants to become friends. And so gradually, as they go on, they're very much the odd couple, incredibly different people, and they have different aims. Although as they go along on their adventurous journey and Adelina comes to join them, the three of them, they actually start to become friends, and they realize they all really want the same thing, which is meaningful friendships and the kind of stuff in life that lasts. Mr. Link is just so innocent. So Mr. Link he's funny. Zach is hilarious. He's very funny, but he's very innocent and very guileless. So he actually doesn't know a lot about, he's about humanity or humans. He's learned to write, he's learned to speak, and he's very curious and he's very open, and he's not a monster really at all. He doesn't really know how to fight or anything. And so gradually as he goes on, you just fall in love with him instantly, and that never stops. And he's also there's a sadness to him because he's been on his own for his entire life. So I think we can all relate to that, trying to find your tribe and find where you feel loved. Adelina, played by Zoe Saldana, is the wife of a friend/competitor, adventurous competitor of the past. And also they'd had some kind of, Sir Lionel thinks they'd had some kind of interaction or fling in the past. They've known each other, but they didn't know each other very well. And I want something from her, and she doesn't trust my character at all because knows that he's just in it for himself. When they meet together, she knows that I'm up to something. And so eventually she decides to come on the trip because she loves adventure herself. She's a very independent woman who is not going to be sort of cajoled or, manipulated in any way. And so they go off on this journey together, and then they actually really kind of develop an affection and a real friendship because they're honest with each other, by the end. He was a man who was very much about
what's on the outside, the presentation. I want to be seen as an important man. I want to be accepted in society. The way he dressed, the way he carried his head. It was like I'm putting on a front here, right? I want you to believe I'm a certain person. And it wasn't exactly who he is, you know? So seeing him and seeing their design for him really helped me. Well, the movie is funny. So it's fun and funny. And I think it's very heartwarming because ultimately it's about finding your family, finding true friendship, finding the things that really matter in life, rather than filling our time with things that we think are going to make people accept us, love us, like us, respect us, but actually just really doing the things we love and being with people we love. And it's in that way, the message of the movie, I think, is very heartwarming and relates to everybody. And so these guys, LAIKA, make movies that, first of all, the artistry is incredible. But this movie, like there are others, like Kubo and the Two Strings, are things that adults can watch, kids can watch. You can watch together and everybody gets something out of it. I think my favorite moments in the movie are the interactions between my character and Mr. Link. I think that odd couple relationship is funny. I love Zach's performance. And I just love seeing these two characters gradually start to get to know each other and understand each other and develop a friendship. And it's funny. And I enjoy that. And I also do love the fight scenes. And it's particularly nice being in a movie where you're involved with the fight scenes, but you don't have to do the fighting. When I toured the LAIKA studio, I was just amazed at, first of all, the size of it, the amount of people involved, the amount of time it takes just to make one frame, 24 frames a second of an entire movie, the years it takes, and just the level of artistry. I had no idea how big the sets were, how involved or how intricate they were. So it's a mixture of just the size of the operation, the hours they put in, but just the people. If you're going to spend 3, 4 years, 7 days a week, 14 hours a day, making a film in a dark sort of space, you have to love it, and they all love it.
One of the things that that we've always tried to do here at LAIKA is to tell different kinds of stories in different genres. I'm really excited about telling different kinds of stories, diving into different kinds of themes, bringing different visual aesthetics to the screen. I don't want to repeat ourselves thematically, visually. And so the thing with Missing Link is that it felt like a very different kind of story, the kind of thing that we hadn't done before. And that's one of the things that gets all of us in this company excited. To visually do something new and distinctive and interesting, but also to dive in a different aspect of what it means to be human. Fundamentally, the film is really about connectivity. It's about empathy. It's about moving from isolation to connection, and it's a really potent emotional story at the core of it. And yet, on the top of it, we put this beautiful veneer of this incredible swashbuckling adventure that goes back to Jules Verne and Indiana Jones and things like that. It's a really cool turn of the century adventure story with monsters, and I thought that was a really exciting story to tell. Missing Link is by far our most ambitious film. It's essentially a travelogue that goes across the world. We start in all these different kinds of locations, which when you're essentially shooting these movies in what amounts to a big warehouse, to make it look like you're gallivanting all across the natural world can be challenging. A lot of times stop motion tends to look like it's shot on a tabletop because it effectively is. But for this film to have the feeling that we wanted to evoke, we needed to go across the globe in all different kinds of environments, which meant that we had to build places, environments, locations that we'd never thought of before, that we'd never designed before. The natural world is difficult to replicate in this medium, and this film was littered with that. And so there were so many different locations that we don't repeat, we don't go back to. Every new sequence, we're going somewhere new. And producers hate that kind of thing because it means we have to design and build new locations all throughout the movie. But it was what the movie required. The film is on some level about discovery, and part of that is the discovery of new locations as well as kind of the emotional discovery that our characters go through. There's the old saw that directing is 90% casting, and I think in this case that's certainly true. We were spoiled for choice here in this film with our leads. We've got Hugh Jackman playing Sir Lionel Frost, we've got Zach Galifianakis playing Mr. Link, and then of course we have Zoe Saldana playing Adelina Fortnight. They're all extraordinarily gifted actors, but they're also incredibly funny, individually and together. The film has a big, warm, gooey heart, and that is really centered in Mr. Link, played by Zach. And he's just so naturally funny. You get him in the recording studio, and he'll read what's there, but he's always riffing. He will not give you the same line reading twice, which is really exciting for a director and a producer as you're trying to craft the performances in the film. Oftentimes, you're in the recording studio, years before you're actually shooting anything, and it gives you when you have an actor like that can ad lib, that can bring so much invention and their own creativity to the performance. It gives you a lot of different choices for making the character really fully come alive, through the voice. But then that inspires the animators to give the character that much more vitality when they're bringing them to life with their hands. Missing Link comes from the tradition of grand adventure stories. Chris and I grew up in the same era, and so we have a lot of the same childhood loves and obsessions. Indiana Jones being, one of the foremost ones. It's that it really is a perfect film, and this film is meant to be evocative of that kind of story. It's a globe-trotting swashbuckler, and those films always had a ton of fun, great visual invention, and great adventure action set pieces, but also had something pretty potent emotionally at the core, and that was something that we wanted to tap into, those great action adventure stories of our youth and childhood, and bring it to a new era with our own unique LAIKA spin. One of my favorite action scenes in the film is the fight that takes place on the boat, this raging storm at sea, where the boat is shifting around as there's this big chase and a fight, and there's peril as our characters are potentially tumbling over the railing into the water. It's the kind of action scene that we've never done before, and it's really cool. It's got so many different layers happening at any given moment. Visually, it's incredibly interesting, and it was challenging to pull off. But then there's also another layer of comedy and peril, and then the music on top of that, which really does bring about the emotion of the scene. It was a really challenging scene to pull off, but I think it's a ton of fun to watch. And I think for me, probably the other scene that's incredibly exciting to watch is the scene that takes place on the ice bridge towards the end of the film. It's towards the climax of our movie, and it's kind of classic cartoon physics involved in that, but it's also, you really feel the peril, and it's just really beautifully choreographed and shot. The animation is extraordinary, and it's just a real joy to watch. With every film, we try to do something with the production design that feels like it's woven from the thread and the fabric of the themes and the intent of the movie. This film is meant to be kind of this kaleidoscopic riot of color. It's essentially a vibrant travelogue of, as we're going across the world. It has a real warmth at the center of it, and we wanted that to be reflected in the palette. It's really punchy, it's bold, it's bright, it's colorful, and it's something that people don't typically associate with stop motion animation. I think stop motion people generally think of as something that's kind of dark and bleak and oppressive and gothic, and certainly there are stories that have been told in the medium using that kind of palette and aesthetic. But this film was a different kind of a movie, and it was a much more bright, colorful, fun adventure story, and it felt like it called for that kind of design, that kind of color palette, and so it just naturally came about because of the overall themes and the emphasis of the movie, and it just kind of sprouted from that. You get back into the history what the missing link is. It's something that that takes us from one phase of our evolution to the next, and it's fundamentally about connectivity, about the link between us. It's about, a character and multiple characters actually who move from isolation to connectivity, who are effectively alone and lonely, and how they can find their place in the world with people who are in some ways very much like them, but in a lot of ways are nothing like them at all. And I think that, when we live in a very fractured world where people are going to their respective corners and throwing mud at each other, the idea of finding commonality in people from disparate backgrounds is really fundamentally what this film is about. And I think it's really what the kind of story we've always tried to tell at LAIKA, is the idea that, getting to the core feeling of empathy, the idea that we all touch the same surface, that we're all connected in some way, and that those things that divide us are less important than the things that bring us together. And that really is the core element of what this movie is about. It's about finding your place. It's about finding where you belong, and it's about finding commonality and love and friendship and fellowship. And I think it's just really a beautiful story that is, particularly resonant given our fractured times. When I think about how stop motion has evolved over the last century, it's pretty remarkable to see the quick how rapidly it's advanced in the last 10-15 years. Essentially, with what we've tried to do at LAIKA, which is to take the foundation of this style of filmmaking, which is craft-based. It's about artists using their hands to bring something to life, and blending that with technologies. That was something that wasn't really an emphasis in the medium before, and it's something that we've tried to blend together. That we've created this meld of these things, and what it's done is it's allowed us to tell the kinds of stories that we couldn't have even imagined a handful of years ago. You look at Coraline, and that was the first thing that we'd ever done, and it was incredibly ambitious for the time, and it's beautifully cinematic. It's also very theatrical, but it's relatively contained. It's a very contained story. This film spans the entire globe with multiple characters and all kinds of different action sequences with different colors and environments and monsters and all these different things that would have been impossible to achieve when we first started. And because every film that we do stands on the shoulders of the ones that precede it, we grow in our technology and our creative capacity and our artistic ability with every successive film, which means a film like Missing Link, which would have been impossible to even contemplate a handful of years ago, is now something that we can pull off with some aplomb. I'm a huge fan of the Walkmen, which is Walter Martin's previous group, and he's just such an interesting songwriter, musician. We were trying to find a song that fit the thematic of the main themes of the movie. And so, you start going through your own record catalog and trying to find just the right song. And in the end, we decided that we'd have to craft something specifically for the movie. And Walter wrote us this very beautiful song that's really about, the main themes of the movie, about fellowship, about friendship, about, loving relationships between people. And it's also incredibly catchy. It's a ton of fun. It just gets kind of stuck in you. And it also feels like it's woven from the overall threads of the film, which it does not feel like it's a pop song that we kludged onto the movie. It feels like this song could have been written and performed in the era that the film was set, which was incredibly important, that it all feels like it's part of the same overall approach. And it's just a beautiful and really fun song. I think that we want people to be transported. We want people to have a good time, to enjoy themselves, to see something new at the cinema, to be excited by the story that we're telling. But I think beyond that, the core theme of empathy is the most important one, which is the very idea that when you watch a story, when you experience someone else's story as if it were yours, you can't help but come back from that experience somewhat changed. You can't help but feel like you're more connected than when you first began, and that's the core of this movie. And I think that cinema is one of the handful of art forms that can actually bring that to the surface, that actually remind us of the shared humanity that we all experience. And I think that as fun as this is and as exciting as it is to watch, that's the thing I'm most proud of, is that at its very core, it's a film about the things that bind us together. Comedy is extraordinarily hard to pull off, and it is so completely subjective. I mean, something that I find funny might not be something that anyone else finds funny. But I think that, it starts first and foremost with the characters and with the writing. And Chris Butler is an extraordinary writer. He's a naturally very funny, witty, clever guy. And so I think the humor in this movie works on a number of different levels. It's very clever. There's some really interesting wordplay, and the repartee between the characters feels sort of like a madcap comedy. And there's also a lot of physical humor, and I think that's why we try to work these things in layers, so that for the kids who are maybe not going to get the verbal sophistication of some of the jokes, that there is some really nice, fun visual and physical comedy that the characters are involved in. And then, you know, for the older members of the family, for the adults, for the grandparents, there's a lot of really incredible verbal wit that's on display. And when you can bring those things together, we can have all members of the family experience a film and enjoy it and draw different things out of it together. That's really what we try to do, to create these shared communal experiences, and I think this film does that. We were trying to find an actor who could bring to life Mr. Link in a way that that maybe you wouldn't expect. I think he is an unexpected choice. You see this big hulking mass of fur, and you don't necessarily think that the voice that's going to come out of that monster is going to be this sweet, warm voice that Zach just naturally has. And he's just so quirky and unusual, and he's got a very strange way of looking at things and bringing those observations to life in a way that maybe was really unexpected. His choices are always very things you wouldn't predict. You lay these things out, and you have certain expectations of how these things are going to be performed. And the thing that always throws you when you're piecing these things together is when an actor or an artist comes aboard and they have a completely different interpretation of what the material is that maybe you didn't expect, maybe you didn't anticipate, but all of a sudden just elevates the material to a different plane. And I think that's absolutely what Zach Galifianakis did with Mr. Link.
I always think of the character outside of the script that I've read and what his life was like in the woods, and he probably was kind of a loner and kind of sweet. But it was kind of all on the pages there, the sweetness of the character, and you chat with the director, you try to find the voice. So it was a fun thing to try to find that sweet spot of this character who doesn't know much about the world, but is willing to search the world for answers. I think he knows himself, but he doesn't have a lot of social graces interacting with I guess humans. But I would imagine he was lonely, but content, but just had some curiosity about what it was like outside of the woods. So I think he was curious and lonely at the same time. I would have stayed in the woods if I were him. Sir Lionel Frost is kind of this throwback type of guy that is used to having nature work to his advantage. He wants to take advantage of this creature in the woods. And I think throughout the movie, you see that relationship of man and beast is kind of softened a little bit. And I think it's nice to see. It's not a regular man and beast story. The Hugh Jackman character, the Sir Lionel Frost, gets to have a heart towards the missing link, which is a nice thing to have, and also it helps their storyline move along. But their relationship is, I think, Mr. Link is just happy to go along, not really knowing what he's getting himself into. He's a gentleman, and he's got a bit of a soft side to him. I think the prize of finding him was his goal, and not really caring that much to know him. But he's forced to know this sweet 7 foot plus creature, and kind of gets to form a friendship with him. That I guess he wasn't maybe expecting. maybe in nature we're more human in a weird way. Then we get into these societies and we become, you know, fighting each other and all that. But yeah, I think the link is very, very human. And he's a sweet, sweet human. The animation, to me, is the real, that's what I would like to know. I would love to sit there with the artist and go, how did you, like, so is there somebody standing in front of you to make the face that you're thinking about with the dialogue? That to me is the real talent, how they figure that part out. It's worth seeing it for the art alone. You could turn me down, just watch it. It's really, if you know the painstaking work that takes, it really makes you appreciate it even more. One of the themes is that this weird missing link character is allowed to be goofy and lovable and against social graces, but he is allowed to be himself. And also realizing that what he thought his happiness was turned out not to be the case. But there are a lot of themes in this movie. Friendship, seeing the world is a really big theme, to get out of your comfort zone and to open your eyes to other ways of how people live. I think this is a really, really great kids movie, and could go down kind of as a classic to me. I mean, it really, and I'm not saying that because I meant it, I'm saying it because it was of Chris's work. You just want to get a rise out of people. And with a movie like this, where you're really kind of like all the pieces have come together, I think the audience is going to come to that conclusion on their own, that they're going to walk away. I mean, there's some really funny parts in it. It's a really great story, and the artwork is tremendous. I think as corny as it sounds, I always just want people to leave anything that I'm involved in is that pep when you're walking your car, walking out of the theater, that you just experienced something with a group of strangers.
This is the form of art in cinema that is not done almost anywhere. And for LAIKA to take it upon themselves to immortalize, you know, what would otherwise be a dying form of art, just a lot of respect goes out to them from my end, you know, and the way the studio is set up is so organized and it's so beautiful, and you feel like you're in this factory of dreamers, and everybody's meticulously working on that one small detail of a thing, of a bigger thing, and they're carrying that execution with so much perfection and so much dedication, and it really felt like I was in a different world when I stepped into LAIKA. Lionel is this cold and superficial individual that, you know, purposely, you know, intends on being a mile wide and an inch deep. Like, he just never wants to go any deeper. And when he does go deep, it's usually about his character and about his reputation. And he puts so much weight. But in reality, what that is masquerading is that he's being neglected by this group of people, and all he ever wants is their approval. So, and now here you have Mr. Link, who on the other side of the world, you know, almost parallel to Lionel's life, he finds himself longing to be around beings, to be around people, to have conversations, to fall in love, to have friends, because he feels really, really lonely. Adelina, who's this character that has been kind of like stuck in limbo since her husband passed away, and she feels like she's constantly living under his shadow, even though he hasn't been in her life for years. And by fulfilling his dream of going to Shangri-La, she's able to discover her longing of just, you know, being being a discoverer herself, and going on her own adventures and trusting herself. The story is about, longing to belong between three individuals that find themselves together on an unexpected journey, and then realize that the treasure that they were looking for was always there within their friendship. When Lionel meets the Loch Ness Monster in the first scene, I mean, it's an epic action scene. And here's this stop motion character, caught in an epic action scene, meeting, like an extraordinary monster. And I don't know, when I witness those moments in cinema, I feel very grateful to be a part of it. But I'm also taught and inspired to keep like, to keep working diligently to and not settle, when art can be better. Yeah, to always strive for that. Working with Chris was amazing. He's so passionate. He wrote this amazing story. These characters were real to him. And usually when I was coming in, just to the studio and doing my voiceovers, I was usually acting with him and not Hugh or Zach. And honestly, it was fantastic. Because he's patient and he's able to go back and revisit, the choices that we've made as a director, and me also as an actor for our character, for Adelina, and that kind of bouncing back and forth with your boss, with your captain, feels amazing when you're both aligned. That you want the story to be great, you want your characters to steal the show, and Chris is definitely a champion for the story, for you, and that felt really great. I think the lessons that are learned, there's something really fantastic about your lead character being the most flawed of all the characters in the story. And that lesson that this character learns, not only is it most rewarding for that character, but it is most rewarding for you, who has been living for 2 hours vicariously through him. And I think that Lionel Frost is a human being, is a character that starts in such a place that it takes you, a long time to soften to him, and by the end of the journey, you're rooting for him and you're proud of him, because you meet, you meet Mr. Link and you meet Adelina, and you sort of go, they're perfect. They're righteous, a true and natural sense of justice. They have good hearts, really clean hearts. And then there's Lionel. So you're able to kind of bounce yourself back and forth between Link and Adelina, and also Lionel. I think that the reason why Adelina is so bothered by Frost is because she does know his heart. She knows that he is a good person. And the fact that good heart is just being weighed down by all these bad habits and this narcissism really irritates her. Because I do believe that when they very first met, that they had natural and super impactful chemistry. And they can't deny that. And the same way she cannot deny her disappointment in the fact that, yes, she likes him, but he makes it really difficult for her to like him. And she feels really torn with feeling this way about him. Her relationship with Mr. Link also evolves, because I think that her rigidity compels her to look at something, a creature like Mr. Link, and disregard him, thinking, oh, he's nothing like me, or, and then to realize that Mr. Link has so much depth and so much longing, and that it just completely, it melts her heart, and she's immediately sold, and she's on his side for everything. She takes it upon herself to go on this mission, and at first she thinks that it's just to, finally get to do something, realize something that her husband really wanted to do and never got to do. She goes from wanting, going on this adventure for that to staying on the adventure because she has to find a family for Mr. Link. So it's a very beautiful and compelling arc for her. When you see a creature that is so big, you're expecting a deep voice that sometimes may haunt you or may make you feel very conflicted to like him. But the moment he opens his mouth and it's Zach, Galifianakis' voice, it's impossible to be tense, to be uncomfortable, or to be scared of Mr. Link.